Hi everyone and welcome to another floral photography video. In today's video I'll be exploring mostly close-up, macro and ICM photography of bluebells and wild garlic in my favourite woodlands in Northumberland. I'll be trying to add a magical twist to some of the images, all in camera with minimal editing required this time. Some will be whimsical close-ups and some will have a different dreamy yet still magical approach with some regular close-ups mixed in, followed by a mix of otherworldly landscape ICM images. I'll be sharing photos taken using my Sony a7 III camera and a variety of lenses, including a couple of vintage lenses such as the Helios 44, a modified Helios 44 lens, a Meyer Gorliz Primoplan 58mm lens and a Sigma 100-400. I was kicking myself for leaving my Sigma 180 macro lens at home, but I did this intentionally to force myself into taking different photos to my usual, as my plan had been mostly to use my vintage lenses to obtain dreamy and magical effects. So let me show you around a little bit before I take some photos. The woodlands are Bothal woods in Northumberland, which luckily for me are quite accessible for the first section. For those that don't know, I use a mobility scooter to get around as I have ME and I get exhausted very easily, plus my coordination is not good. I do need a little bit help off my partner to get through a small awkward section at the start, but provided it hasn't been raining, then I can usually manage to get my scooter a few hundred foot into the woods. I don't need to go that far before I'm fully immersed in beautiful views accompanied by the dawn chorus of birds and the sound of the stream, which is absolute bliss. The first sight that greets me is a sea of lush wild garlic, which unfortunately I can't smell because I've completely lost my sense of smell. Then there is a very short path down to a pretty little stream and two paths going up into the woods, one gradually and one with a steeper slope, which is the one I followed as I wanted the views up there. So here you can see the stream, which is absolutely gorgeous, and it's got the wild garlic and the bluebells on both sides of it. These are just phone videos, so they're not brilliant, but they're not meant to last long. It's just to show you the scene really and how pretty it is, because I know not everybody manages to get out to these places. I take all of my gear in a big bag that fits on the back of my mobility scooter and a basket that fits on the front. That's where I keep my cameras. I take a big mat that I roll up and that's to lie on, and I generally only lie on the path because I don't want to crush any of the plants surrounding me, but that mat is so handy. And in the past, when I haven't taken a mat, I've just taken a heavy duty bin bag which I'll easily roll up and just fit in the pocket of any rucksack. So just another handy little tip for you there. I do take a tripod. Sometimes I'll take a normal size tripod and a mini one. But this time I forgot to take my normal size tripod and I did regret it. So if you're going to go out and photograph the bluebells and you need a tripod, I highly recommend taking a mini tripod or something that will get you low down to the ground. If you haven't got steady hands, then it's very, very handy. So now you've seen what the woodlands are like and we've set the scene a little bit. Let's get into the photography side of things. I decided to set myself up quite high in the woodlands as this gave me a variety of options. it meant that I could face looking downwards down the hill in the woodlands, which would mean I would get a backdrop of a sea of bluebells, a layer of bluebells, with the backdrop of the greenery of the trees. Or if I turned around and looked at the bluebells on the hillside, I would get a backdrop of the blues of the flowers, or I could tilt higher up and then I would get the lovely hints of the sky coming through the trees. So here you can see my first set were taken pointed down the hill slightly. I had my Helios 44 lens connected to my Sony a7 III using an M42 adapter. This is a manual lens and I chose f4 with a shutter speed of 250 as there was a light breeze and an ISO of 250. Now normally this lens can give me interesting bokeh, but I was a little underwhelmed with the results as most of these didn't feel much different to my usual macro images and I wanted something a little bit more magical. So I turned around and pointed up the hill, getting some of the light coming through the trees for these ones, and I think that gave me a better bokeh and a little bit more of the magical feel that I was after. It's not always easy to get a good photo of bluebells. You need to be able to choose a good specimen and isolate it from the others, and then getting the right angle and finding the one that the light is hitting. I decided to swap to my 100 to 400 lens to see if I could make use of the compression that this lens can bring and single out the flowers a bit further away. This really made a big difference, so I decided to stick with this lens for a while. And I was able to just fully immerse myself into this wonderful sea of bluebells as a result. And I decided to use manual focus as well and lie on the ground looking through the undergrowth using a fairly shallow depth of field. Although on this lens I could only go down to about f6.3, it worked well enough depending on the distance of the flowers and the foreground or the background. I particularly enjoyed taking the images where I'd literally had my head on the ground in a pile of leaves looking through all of the bluebells, creating a dreamy out of focus foreground and making everything or almost everything out of focus, giving a kind of dreamy fairy tale like impressionist look. It was like being transported to the fairies' realm. Bluebells are actually known in folklore as fairy flowers, and bluebell woods are said to be enchanted. And walking through them, you can apparently be trapped by fairies and led astray to their fairy forts. Well, they certainly had me enchanted, and I gladly would have followed the fairies anywhere by this point. I also enjoyed taking a few with this spider hanging from the bluebells. It's always nice to incorporate some wildlife too, isn't it? And of course I had to take a few photographs of the wild garlic as well. How could I not? So I took a couple with the 100 to 400 and then I swapped over to my Primoplan lens, which did give really nice dreamy results. I quite like these ones. I also took a couple of bluebell photos using my modified Helios lens. This is where the glass inside is reversed. My partner looked up a YouTube tutorial on how to do this and he did it for me, luckily. Now this is the look that I'd wanted earlier in the day, but I'd forgotten this lens, so spoiler alert, I took these ones in my garden. Just goes to show that you don't need to go that far to produce something magical. I do find that when shooting wide open or close to wide open with this lens, that if my subject is not central, then there's rarely anything in focus, so sometimes you need to crop afterwards to get your desired composition. I didn't just want to photograph close-ups whilst I was out. I fancied trying out taking out of focus photographs of the woodlands with either my Helios or my Primoplan lens to make the most of the bouquet and to produce enchanted, dreamy images suggestive of like fairies, woodlands. To me, they worked, but I can't recall which lens I used for which images now. I think I used the unmodified Helios for them, but because they're old manual lenses attached with an adapter as well, the camera doesn't record which lens, focal length or aperture is used, so I'm not really certain. I have added some record shots for some of the scenes so that you can compare and see what you think. I really like the results. And finally, I spent about 15 minutes or so taking ICM images, mostly using my kit lens, which is a 28-70. I used shutter speeds of between 0.4 and 0.6 seconds, mostly, using an aperture of f/18 and adjusting my ISO as necessary. And it was dull enough in the woods not to need an ND filter for these, which was quite handy. So that is just part one of my Bluebell session this year. I spent more time with these beautiful flowers in an absolutely stunning cemetery near me, which is full of not only bluebells and wild garlic, but also loads of different cherry blossoms and other fruit and blossoms as well, which means that I will have another video coming out with bluebell images, although the images will be quite different to what I took in this video. And then I will make a separate video on the cherry blossoms too. So I hope you'll join me for those. And here is a sneak peek of the cherry blossoms. Thanks for watching and see you soon.